Coming up on this episode, a look at the Dallas Mavericks. Do they provide a blueprint to the Warriors getting back to the top of the Western Conference, or are the situations completely different? Yes, welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. Hope you're all having a good week. On this episode, I just wanted to do a bit of a dive into the likely NBA finalist, the likely Western Conference champion, Dallas Mavericks. I'm recording this just over an hour before the tip-off of Game 4. So by the time you're listening to this, there's a good chance that that game is over and that the Dallas Mavericks may have advanced to the NBA Finals to face the Boston Celtics, who obviously got it done eventually over the Indiana Pacers yesterday in a sweep, which, I mean, I want to give credit to the Pacers first and foremost. I actually thought they were more competitive than they were going to be. Now, they should have stole a game. This series should still be going, but they could have also stole 3 games. Like the Pacers, it's funny to say, the Pacers could be up 3-1 right now if they just executed better in the last 2 to 3 minutes of games. Like they were the better team for 44, 45 minutes of 3 of the 4 games, essentially. So I do want to give them some credit for being competitive in 3 of the 4 games and having the opportunity to win 3 of the 4 games, but obviously it's disappointing not to have an Eastern Conference Finals, obviously, that goes 6 or 7 games and is ultimately more competitive in terms of the scoreline than what it was. But obviously in the West, the Mavericks are 3-0 lead over the Minnesota Timberwolves. Somewhat surprisingly, it must be said, after the Timberwolves beat the Nuggets in Game 7. I still cannot fathom how that even happened. But anyway, it's obviously been super impressive from the Mavericks, and they've got the opportunity to close it out at home tonight. And obviously they're coming off a year last season where they finished 11th in the Western Conference. Were really, really disappointing. And so I think for Warrior fans, we're seeing the similarities between what the Mavericks have done in the last 12 months and hopefully what the Warriors could do in the next 12 months, given they finished 10th in the Western Conference this season. So there's some similarities there, and I just wanted to dive into that. Is there actually like proper similarities, more so than just the finishing position, in comparison from last season with the Mavericks and this season with the Warriors? Is there anything more than that can be taken into that can provide optimism to what the Warriors can do next season? And obviously this is a Mavericks team that was in the Western Conference Finals against the Warriors 2 seasons ago. So obviously last year was more of just an off season for them in terms of their quality of play and their end result. And so, how much do we buy into that, or do we buy into the fact of their been super aggressive in terms of their roster movement over the last 15, 16 months, and perhaps that provides a blueprint for how the Warriors can get back into not only playoff contention, but title contention as well moving forward. That was a good team that they rolled out against the Warriors a couple of years ago. But if you look at their team now, 5 of their top 6 rotation players have been acquired in the last 15, 16 months, basically. If you date back to just before the deadline, mid-season deadline last year, where they acquired Kyrie Irving, which was certainly a risky move at the time. But I actually think, you look at what they gave up for him in terms of, Dorian Finney-Smith and Spencer Dinwiddie kind of thing. Obviously a few picks thrown in there as well. But I think it was more so the contract that they then handed him in the offseason that was probably the more risky aspect to it, given the unreliability that we'd seen from Kyrie for 3, 4, maybe even 5 years before that. He was widely viewed as one of the most unreliable stars in the league, and therefore, do you really want to be handing out a 3-year, was $130, $140 million contract to that guy? Well, that's obviously worked out perfectly, and it doesn't actually really matter what happens in the next 2 years with Kyrie. Like, if you are giving him that contract, if that can give you a NBA Finals berth in one of those 3 seasons, then you'd have to consider that a win, to be honest. So you then move forward. From there, they get to draft night. They acquire Derek Lively II in a draft night trade with the Oklahoma City Thunder, which saw them get Cason Wallace in the 10th pick, Lively the 12th pick. I think the Mavericks moved off Davis Bertans' contract in that as well, so they get a center for the future. But not only, it's been so surprising the impact that Lively has been able to have throughout his entire rookie season, but specifically in the playoffs as well, where you do see a lot of young big men get played off the floor. Coaches don't necessarily trust in them as much, but he's been fantastic. Obviously, had that big hit to the back of the head in Game 3, so wishing him all the best health-wise, but he's obviously been huge for them. And then you look at free agency, Derek Jones Jr. has been a massive piece for them that can't go unnoticed, really. He's playing a perfect role of, 3-and-D with obviously he's, getting some lob dunks from Luka as well on a minimum contract, and he didn't sign till August either. And I think this is where GMs can often make their reputation. To be honest, is you look at these teams with little financial flexibility, and the Warriors are one of those teams. And how can you improve the roster with minimal financial flexibility? And we saw what was the Warriors were able to do in 2021-22 when they had Otto Porter Jr. and just how impactful he was for them. And so you look at their last couple of seasons now, and they haven't been quite able to replicate that. And yes, it's easy to say, well, their minimum contracts, maybe, maybe taxpayer mid-level exception contracts. We're talking about, $2 to $5 million here kind of thing. But, the better GMs are probably going to have a better strike rate at hitting these guys than some other GMs in the league. And I think the Warriors would have obviously been disappointed with what's happened in free agency the last couple of off seasons. I mean, Dante was really good for them. There's no doubt about that, but they also weren't able to unlock him in a way that the Knicks have this season, which is not entirely on them. But maybe he could have done more for the Warriors than what maybe they gave him the opportunity to do. He was good for the Warriors. There's no doubt about that. But then you look at the other guys and you think of JaMychal Green, and then this season Corey Joseph and Dario Saric. They have underdelivered on expectation, I suppose. But then again, you've got to look at it as these guys are minimum contracts. How much can you expect? Obviously, there's a lot of luck that has to be involved in this. I mean, the Warriors got the one good year from Otto Porter Jr., the one healthy year from Otto Porter Jr. in the last 5 or 6 years of his career. And Derek Jones Jr., I think, has probably played far better than the Mavericks could have ever expected. And there's also some luck in he would have seen the Mavericks as a fit, getting lobs from Luka, the double teams that come to him being wide open in the corner, having all these offensive opportunities where he's essentially wide open and otherwise doesn't have to do too much and could just focus on the defensive side of the ball. He would have seen that as a perfect fit. And so, the players obviously got to choose you as their destination. And having Luka obviously would have been a big factor in that, as Steph has been for the Warriors as well. And then moving forward, obviously this mid-season trade deadline, they trade for Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington, both who are starting, both who have had huge moments in the playoffs. Seems like PJ Washington can't miss an open corner three, which is somewhat surprising given, if you look at his career, if you look at his regular season numbers, I think he was 32, 33% from three-point range. So not actually kind of high volume three-point shooter, but not necessarily a high percentage guy. But he just seems to make the big ones. He's making some really important fourth quarter corner threes. Again, the ability for those two guys to take advantage of what Luka and Kyrie can do is, just a fantastic fit for them. So I think it's easy to look at all these, these 5 things, like Kyrie, Derek Lively, and then you look at, Derek Jones Jr. and Gafford and Washington. You look at this and you think it's easy to say that the Warriors need to be aggressive and that, the Mavericks took some risks, but that risk is, ultimately, coming to reward right now in, likely getting to the NBA Finals. And I probably have them. Well, do I have them over the Celtics? I think I need to have a bit more to think about it. I'm not sure. But it's certainly been worth it. Let's just put it that way. And I think it's easy to say, well, this is what the Warriors need to do. The Warriors need to be as aggressive on the trade market as the Mavericks have been in the last 15, 16 months. And that they need to do that to, revitalize the roster, retool it, and, hopefully get back to some major relevance at the top of the Western Conference. But I also want to point out, and I think this is the big thing, because I think, as I said, it's just easier to say that, look at how aggressive the Mavericks were. That's what the Warriors need to do. I think it's important to note that these are entirely different situations in a sense. I love loyalty in sport, and I think loyalty both ways is a huge factor in obviously decision making from players and teams alike. And as a fan, I grew up following AFL football, sport in Australia, AFL football, and I think sport in Australia, there's probably more loyalty, I think, in Australian sport than there would be in American sport. Now, if you want to argue against that, you can, but I would think there's a lot more AFL players that play their career with one club than there is, NBA players that play their career with one franchise kind of thing. But it's super special to be able to watch, Steph and Clay and Draymond, play their whole career with the Warriors, and even at this point of their career, like we can still celebrate them to an extent, as much as we still want to try and win and get back to championship relevance. But I love it. Like I'm a Collingwood fan in the AFL. Scott Pendlebury's coming up to his 400th game here in a few weeks, and for me as a fan to be able to, he was drafted in 2005 when I was eight years old, and I'm 27 years old, and I still get to watch him run around on a weekly basis, and it's unbelievable. The greatest player in club history, and it's like I pinch myself. I literally pinch myself every week that I get to watch this guy go out and play nearly 20 years after I first watched him play and pull on the black and white stripes. And it's the same for the Warriors. Like there'd be so many Warrior fans out there that would feel the same in terms of, Steph comes into the league in 2009, and the fact, a lot of people, in 2009 would have been, young, or whatever age you are, it doesn't really matter. But to be able to watch someone go from, their rookie season and then now 15 years in the league, all with the one team, the success that he's had, I think it's so, so, so special, and we can't lose sight of that. And so really, like, it's easy, when Draymond has these incidents and indiscretions over the last couple of seasons, it's very easy again to say, oh, we need to get rid of this guy. How long can we put up with this kind of stuff? Well, you've just got to look at the totality of it. And in reality, like Draymond Green is only on the Warrior roster right now because of what he has done for, the positives and the good that he has done for the franchise over a dozen years, basically now, like, 12 years. That's why he's on the roster. It's the loyalty aspect of the Warriors not wanting to move on from that and retaining that loyalty aspect, which I think is important. But obviously, you've got to find a balance between being loyal and also being aggressive and trying to get better. And I think that's where the Warriors are stuck right now. Like, even if you look at someone like Andrew Wiggins, it's like, again, very easy for us as fans or analysts, whatever else, to say Andrew Wiggins needs to be gone. Like, whatever trade they make this offseason, it will most likely include Andrew Wiggins' salary. He needs to be gone. The Warriors need to find an upgrade there some way or another. Very easy for us to say that. However, we are 2 years removed from Andrew Wiggins being the second best player on a championship team, and that means something. So, yes, there's not the loyalty aspect with him than there is with Steph, Clay, and Draymond, but I think there's a loyalty aspect there. There's a history there that is far greater than a lot of players around the league. I would say 95% of players around the league. And if you look at the recent trade, so it's not only the Mavericks who I just spoke about, but if you look at all four of these conference finalists, there is a theme of, hey, you've got to be aggressive in the trade market. So the Pacers go out and get Pascal Siakam. The Celtics in the offseason go out and get Kristaps Porzingis and Drew Holiday. The Minnesota Timberwolves, heavily criticized for it. Still a trade that I don't think anyone thinks they should have done. But you know what? They went for it. They went out and got Rudy Gobert 2 off seasons ago. Put all their chips in. And they might have been able to make these Western Conference finals even without Rudy. But at the end of the day, like, he won Defensive Player of the Year this season. He was a huge part of their regular season success. And he's having his issues now, which I think, we could have all seen coming, really, and was part of the reason why we hated this trade from a Minnesota perspective. But the reality is, like, they took a risk, and he's helped them get to this position, right? So there is clearly a theme of, hey, you've got to be aggressive on the trade market. But again, if you look at Andrew Wiggins compared to the guys that were given up for those players I just mentioned, the Warriors have much more of an affiliation of a loyalty with Andrew Wiggins than the Pacers did with Bruce Brown when they traded him for Pascal Siakam. Or the Celtics moving on from Malcolm Brogdon. Cool, like you won as a 6 man of the year, like you won 6 man of the year with this. Cool, like who really cares? Rob Williams, nice piece for us, particularly in 2021-22. Like there's not the loyalty aspect there when they traded those two guys for Drew Holiday. Right? There's not the loyalty aspect when you're giving up Malik Beasley, Jared Vanderbilt, Patrick Beverley for Rudy Gobert. There's not. Even so Marcus Smart, you could say, well, yeah, there's definitely some loyalty there. He was at the Celtics for a long time, started his career there. But even I would argue, they obviously gave up Marcus Smart for Kristaps Porzingis. Even then, I would argue that what Andrew Witt, from purely a championship winning aspect, purely from a winning aspect, what Andrew Wiggins did for the Warriors in the 2022 playoffs far exceeds anything Marcus Smart ever did for the Boston Celtics. Again, happy for you to argue about that. But I actually think, again, there's a loyalty aspect there that maybe might even be more for the Warriors with Andrew Wiggins than there was for the Celtics with Marcus Smart. And so, again, I just go back to it. It's easy for us to say they need to do this, they need to trade this guy, they need to do that. But I think loyalty is a big factor here. And especially, again, you go back to Wiggins, there's obviously the aspect of him, being the second best player on a championship team, which will go down in history, right? That is a history-making event for this franchise. So there's that aspect. But there's also the aspect of his value from a trade standpoint has gone significantly down to the point of, there's some interest with the Raptors, and I've seen a lot of Raptors fans on social media say, yeah, Wiggins would be good. Wouldn't mind him. Oh, if we also got a pick involved in there as well. And getting off, the Warriors having to pay to get off Wiggins' contract, which I don't think will happen, because I think it's still that 2022 championship is still close enough in the rearview mirror. It's still 2 years ago, only 2 years ago, which, yes, is a long time, but you've also got to see Andrew Wiggins is not even 30 years old yet. He still should theoretically be in his prime. And so, I listened to the Athletic podcast this morning with Anthony Slater, Tim Kawakami, and Marcus Thompson. And, those guys are talking about, can Andrew Wiggins get back to, anything near his 2022 playoff level? And he doesn't necessarily need to get back to that, but somewhere near it. Can he get back to somewhere near there? And so we're still having those discussions. And the Warriors would still be having those discussions internally, rather than just saying, we need to move on from this guy, because there is a loyalty aspect there. And there's also the basketball aspect of, Wiggins' value being so much lower than what it was. And as I said on last episode as well, his value being so much higher to the Warriors than what it is in league circles generally. The last thing I wanted to put on this as well is that for the Mavericks, it is so much easier to trade your future picks than it is for the Warriors right now. There's much less thought that needs to go into it. So when they give up a future first-round pick or a pick swap or whatever it is for Daniel Gafford at the mid-season trade deadline, and I think we all see, Daniel Gafford's a nice player. He's also just a role player, right? He's a role player that plays 20, 25 minutes a night, not a star by any means. Do you, in most circumstances, would you give up a potentially top 10 pick for Daniel Gafford? No, I don't think anyone thinks that Daniel Gafford is worth a top 10 pick. Maybe in this draft, because this draft isn't considered good, but in most years, Daniel Gafford is not considered worthy of trading a top 10 pick for. However, if you've got a Luka Doncic who is 24, now he's 25 years of age, if you've got him in place, then a pick in 3 or 4 years' time is that pick is almost no chance of becoming anything near to Luka Doncic. And so even if you're paying overs for Daniel Gafford, if it means that you are keeping Luka Doncic happy and keeping the team in championship relevance, which is what ultimately is going to make him happy, then that is worth it. That is worth it. Paying overs for Daniel Gafford or PJ Washington or taking a risk on Kyrie Irving, that is worth it. Because you've got a 25-year-old Luka Doncic who you want as the head of your franchise for the next decade plus. That is worth it. So you care far less about your future first-round picks because you know none of those picks are really any chance of getting anywhere near the level of Luka Doncic. But then if you look at the Warriors side of things, Stephen Curry is 36 years old. If Steph Curry was 10 years younger, it's so much easier to say we need to trade the 2026, 2028, whatever first-round picks is needed. So much easier. But when you start talking about a 2028 first-round pick, which is in 4 years, which is when Steph's going to be 40 years old and either retired or far removed from his prime, then you need to have far greater discussions on whether you're willing to give up that pick, what protections you want on that pick, what you're willing to give that pick up for. Like, there's so much more that goes into it. And so, again, it comes down to a balance, right? It comes down to a balance of the loyalty, the future, and trying to be aggressive in the trade market at the same time to try and improve your roster. Like, it's difficult. And I think the Warriors, I think Mike Dunleavy Jr. is in a difficult position and in a far more difficult position maybe than most other general managers. Because the other thing is, and this would be my final point, the Warriors are a victim of their own excellence. They are. So we're talking about them. We're not talking about them trying to get back to the first or second round of the playoffs. We're talking about them trying to win the Western Conference and get back to the NBA Finals. That is the level as fans that we want them to reach. And we think they can reach that because they have got the greatest player in franchise history, arguably a top 10 player in NBA history in Stephen Curry. And because they've won 4 championships in the last decade. Right? That is the expectation. As opposed to, like, you look at a team like the Pacers trade for Pascal Siakam, take a bit of a risk. They'd probably be pretty happy with making the conference finals. Maybe they re-sign Siakam, probably going to overpay on that. But, you know, if it means they can remain relevant and get to the second round of the playoffs every year, get back to the conference finals again, who knows? Maybe they can build on their roster going forward and get back and get to the NBA finals. Like, for a team that has been bereft of championship success, like, you are more comfortable with being good, I think, rather than being great. Well, not comfortable, but there's less criticism. And I don't think anyone out there is thinking the expectation on the Indiana Pacers next season is to make the NBA Finals. As I think for the Warriors, with Steph Curry, one of the top 10 players in the history of the league, there is an expectation there. As there is with LeBron James and whatever team he's on. As there is, you could argue, with Kevin Durant as well. Like, everyone is getting on the Phoenix Suns after their playoff performance and after their season because you've got Kevin bloody Durant on your team. Like, the expectation should be that you at least, at minimum, get to the Western Conference Finals. If not the NBA Finals, if not winning it all. There's different expectations here. And the Warriors, I think, are a victim of their own excellence. And I think, you know, is it up to us as fans to adjust the expectation and to say, you know, Steph's 36, Draymond and Clay are 34. Maybe we're going to be okay with just, maybe we should be okay with just riding this out, celebrating who they are as players, what they mean to the franchise, and being okay with making the second round of the playoffs and not really getting much further. Being the 5th or 6th seed in the West for the next few years. Maybe we should be okay with that. But it's also like that's going to be a tough task in itself. That's going to be because I've spoken repeatedly about how competitive this Western Conference is, which also lends itself to the idea of, hey, the Warriors, were 10th, yes, but they did have a 46-36 record. Maybe they're closer than what we actually think because the West is so competitive. Like, if the Warriors went into a 7-game series with the Pacers tomorrow, granted, give the Pacers a few days rest, could the Warriors beat the Pacers in a 7-game series? I don't think they'd be favourites, but I wouldn't count it out as a possibility. And so the West versus the East is just crazy. And again, the expectations should probably be adjusted based on that. But the Warriors also need to make moves based on that, unless there's some kind of 1-16 playoff format change, which has been mooted a little bit. But other than that, I'll finish it up there. Thank you very much if you've got to this point of the episode. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. You can comment on there, or you can tweet me at POK252. That's POK252 on Twitter/X. You can follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well. Other than that, guys, hope you have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you on the next episode.